Welcome to our listener. We are embarking on a very specialized, highly detailed deep dive today.
We are indeed. And your mission as the listener is super clear here. You are preparing for the Life in the UK test, specifically the third edition.
Right.
And we are here to provide you with a comprehensive, engaging, and just meticulously detailed audio study guide. Now, to do this effectively, we're drawing strictly from the materials you provided to us, which is very important to note.
Yeah. We have excerpts from the official Life in the UK guide and also a highly condensed, fact-packed document known as the 4925 Summary.
I really want to underline that point, actually.
Yep.
We are relying exclusively on those provided sources for this deep dive.
Just those sources.
Exactly. We are not pulling in outside historical analysis or, modern commentary. We are laser focused on exactly what your study materials say. Because, well, that specific narrative is precisely what you'll be tested on.
Yeah, and before we get into all the kings and the wars, the laws, the culture, we kind of need to establish some ground rules for how we're going to navigate all this.
Absolutely. Because over the course of this deep dive, we are going to cover thousands of years of history.
It's a lot.
It is. It includes political upheaval, religious schisms, violent conflicts, the whole expansion and contraction of an empire. So I want to make it explicitly clear to you, the listener, that as your guides today, we are not endorsing any viewpoints or political sides or historical actions.
Right.
We are impartially reporting the factual content required for your test, exactly as it is presented in your source material.
Exactly. I mean, history is incredibly complex, but the sources present a specific, defined narrative that you are required to know for this exam.
Precisely.
We're simply here to help you unpack it, understand the mechanisms behind the facts, and make it stick in your memory. So, let's unpack this. We're going to start by looking at the core contract of living in the UK and sort of defining the physical map of the place.
That's a good place to start.
Yeah, and from there, we'll trace the footprints of the very first hunter-gatherers, follow the rise of parliaments and industry, and bring it all the way up to modern society and how the legal system functions today.
It is a phenomenal journey. And logically, well, before we can discuss the history of the nation, we have to define what the nation actually is,
Yeah.
both philosophically and geographically.
Right. And the materials start with a very clear philosophical baseline, like the fundamental principles of British life. There are 5 key pillars you really need to memorize here. First is democracy. Second, the rule of law. Third, individual liberty. Fourth, tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs. And fifth, participation in community life.
And what's essential here is not just memorizing the words themselves, but understanding how they function as a reciprocal system.
Oh, like a give and take.
Exactly. The sources outline this as a balance of rights and responsibilities.
Yeah, I always think of it as a two-way street, or like a social contract. It's the ultimate what you give versus what you get scenario.
Right.
If you live in this society, there are certain protections the state guarantees you, but in exchange, well, you owe certain behaviors back to the community.
That is the perfect framework for understanding it. So
Yeah.
let's examine the what you get side of the equation first.
Okay.
According to the summary, the UK offers you freedom of belief and religion, freedom of speech, and freedom from unfair discrimination.
Huge things.
Massive. Furthermore, it guarantees the right to a fair trial and the right to join in the election of a government. These are profound individual liberties, and they're all protected by the rule of law.
But the what you must do column is equally critical for the test, right? Because you don't just get to enjoy those freedoms in a vacuum.
Precisely. If you wish to be a permanent resident or citizen, the materials dictate very specific responsibilities.
Like what?
Well, you must respect and obey the law. You must respect the rights of others. And importantly, that includes their right to hold their own opinions, even if you strongly disagree with them.
Right.
And you are required to treat others with fairness.
And it extends beyond just interpersonal behavior, doesn't it? It kind of gets into how you manage your own life.
It does, yeah. You are explicitly expected to look after yourself and your family. And finally, you must look after the area in which you live and the environment.
Which ties directly back to that fifth pillar we mentioned, the participation in community life.
Exactly. The state expects you to be an active, responsible participant in your local surroundings.
Okay, so that is the philosophical map, the social contract. But let's shift to the literal physical map, because drawing the borders of the UK can actually be incredibly confusing.
Oh, they really can't.
People use the terms interchangeably all the time when they really shouldn't.
It is a widespread point of confusion, but for the test, the definitions are rigid and distinct. We have to start with Great Britain.
Okay.
Great Britain is a geographical landmass, and politically, it refers only to three nations: England, Scotland, and Wales.
Okay, let me lock that in. Great Britain is just those three. England, Scotland, Wales. So when someone says the UK, they are actually talking about a larger political entity.
Correct. The official full name of the sovereign state is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Ah, I see.
So the UK consists of Great Britain, which again is England, Scotland, and Wales, plus Northern Ireland. And it is vital to note that the rest of the island of Ireland is a completely separate, independent country.
Right, the Republic of Ireland. It is not part of the UK.
Exactly, not part of the UK.
That makes sense. Great Britain is 3 nations, the UK is 4. But what about all these other islands around the coast? Because the materials mention exceptions that often trip people up on the exam.
Yes. You really must distinguish the UK from the Crown Dependencies and the British Overseas Territories.
Okay, what's a crown dependency?
The Crown Dependencies mentioned in your text are the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man. The crucial mechanism to understand here is that while they are very closely linked to the UK, they have their own independent governments.
Oh, right.
Therefore, they are not formally part of the UK.
See, that is a classic trick question scenario. They are linked to the UK, but they govern themselves, so technically, legally, they are not part of the UK.
Exactly right. And the exact same logic applies to the British Overseas Territories.
Like where?
Well, the text gives examples like St. Helena and the Falkland Islands. These are territories spread across the globe that have a constitutional link to the UK, but again, they are not a part of the UK itself.
It's fascinating how complex the geopolitical borders are. They're essentially artifacts of centuries of history, you know?
They absolutely are.
And just to round out the geography section, we need to know the nerve centers of these 4 nations, the capital cities.
They are straightforward, but absolutely essential to memorize. London is the capital of England, and it also serves as the capital for the UK as a whole.
Right.
Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland, Cardiff is the capital of Wales, and Belfast is the capital of Northern Ireland.
So just doing a quick mental checkpoint here before we start our time traveling. Listeners, here's quiz 1. What is the difference between Great Britain and the UK?
Well, if I'm looking at Great Britain, I'm only looking at England, Scotland, and Wales. But the moment I add Northern Ireland to the mix, I am now looking at the United Kingdom.
Nailed it. And anything like the Isle of Man or the Falkland Islands sits entirely outside of that specific UK definition.
You have the map perfectly defined.
Excellent. So now that we know the borders, we need to look at who walked across them first. We are heading way, way back in time to early Britain.
According to the text, the story begins roughly 10,000 years ago during the Stone Age.
Wow.
And the most critical piece of context here is that Britain was not an island at this point.
Wait, really?
Yes, it was physically connected to the continent of Europe by a land bridge. The very first people to arrive were simply hunter-gatherers following herds of animals across that land bridge.
That completely changes how you visualize early Britain. You could literally walk from modern-day France straight into modern-day London without ever getting your feet wet.
Precisely. It was only about 10,000 years ago, as the ice ages ended and sea levels rose, that the land bridge flooded. That's what cut Britain off from the continent and officially turned it into an island.
So we have these isolated hunter-gatherers wandering around. When does society start to actually put down roots?
The major shift happens about 6,000 years ago with the arrival of the first farmers. The sources note that their ancestors likely migrated from Southeast Europe. And this transition from hunting to farming is just monumental.
Yeah.
Because they are staying in one place to tend crops, they begin building permanent structures.
Like houses and stuff.
Yes, and monuments. These are the people who built Stonehenge in the county of Wiltshire.
Stonehenge. Okay, one of the most famous prehistoric monuments in the world. But it wasn't a town, right?
No. The text specifies that Stonehenge was probably a special gathering place for seasonal ceremonies.
Got it.
However, these early farmers did build permanent settlements as well. The summary highlights Skara Brae.
Skara Brae, where is that?
It's located on Orkney, which is an island off the north coast of Scotland. It is recognized as the best preserved prehistoric village in northern Europe.
Wow.
It gives us profound insight into how these early agricultural communities lived.
So we move from the Stone Age into the Bronze Age around 4,000 years ago. People discover how to mix copper and tin to make bronze tools and weapons. And then eventually comes the Iron Age. And the Iron Age gives us something really visually striking that changes the landscape. The hill fort.
Yes. As populations grew and Competition for land increased. Defense became critical. The materials specifically mention a massive Iron Age hill fort at Maiden Castle in the county of Dorset.
Okay, Maiden Castle.
These were vast earthwork enclosures built on high ground, which suggests a society that was becoming much more organized and territorial.
And culturally, who are these people in the Iron Age?
During this time, the people spoke a Celtic language. And these Celtic tribes represent a massive leap forward in societal complexity for one specific reason mentioned in your text.
Which is?
They were the first people to make coins in Britain.
Which is huge. The moment you have a standardized currency, you have complex trade.
Exactly. The text explicitly marks the creation of these first coins as the official beginnings of British history, as it signifies a shift toward a recorded, structured economy.
But the Celtic tribes don't get to develop in isolation. And this introduces one of the most dominant themes in early British history. People just keep showing up in boats looking to conquer the island.
Indeed they do. The first major organized invasion force was the Romans.
Right.
Julius Caesar attempted an invasion in 55 BC, but he was actually unsuccessful and retreated. It took nearly another 100 years before the Romans returned. In 43 AD, Emperor Claudius launched a successful invasion.
But wait, the Romans had a massive, highly trained professional army. The locals were basically tribal warriors. Did the Celtic tribes just hand over the keys?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
There was fierce, bloody resistance. The text highlights a specific leader you must know.
Boudica.
Boudica, yes, the queen of the Iceni tribe. She led a massive rebellion against the Romans, burning several settlements to the ground before she was eventually defeated.
Wow.
She is remembered as a powerful symbol of native resistance, and the text notes there is a prominent statue of her in her chariot on Westminster Bridge in London today.
Okay, so despite the resistance, the Romans do eventually secure control over most of the island. But they never conquer the whole thing. Scotland remains a major problem for them.
Yes, the northern tribes, who are known as the Picts, were incredibly formidable. The Romans realized that conquering the rugged northern terrain just wasn't worth the cost in blood and treasure.
So what did they do?
Emperor Hadrian ordered the construction of a massive stone and turf border wall to literally keep the northern tribes out of the Roman province.
Hadrian's Wall, which
Yes.
is just an insane feat of ancient engineering.
It was a heavily fortified border. The text notes that forts and sections of the wall can still be seen today at archaeological sites like Housesteads and Vindolanda.
Housesteads in Vindolanda. Got it. So the Romans are in Britain for roughly 400 years. They build roads, they build villas, they introduce a structured legal system.
Oh, do.
The text also notes that during the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, the first Christian communities begin to appear in the UK. But then in 410 AD, it all just stops. Why?
Because the Roman Empire was collapsing under pressure from barbarian invasions back in mainland Europe.
Uh-huh.
The Roman legions were recalled from Britain to defend the core of the empire, basically leaving the Britons to fend for themselves.
That must have created a massive power vacuum. I mean, you have 400 years of infrastructure and security, and then suddenly the police force just packs up and leaves. Who walks into that void?
Tribes from northern Europe quickly took advantage.
Oh.
Specifically, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes.
The Anglo-Saxon.
Yes, they invaded, and by about 600 AD, they had established several Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, primarily in the area that is now England.
Okay.
And what is vital to understand here is the profound cultural overwrite that occurred.
What do you mean?
Well, the languages these various Germanic tribes spoke merged to form the basis of Old English. So they brought their own language and culture, but eventually they too were transformed by religion.
Because they converted to Christianity.
They did. And they were aided by a wave of influential missionaries whose names definitely appear on your test.
Oh, let's hear them.
The materials specifically name St. Patrick, who became the patron saint of Ireland. Then there's St. Columba, who founded a monastery on the island of Iona off the coast of Scotland.
Okay.
And finally, St. Augustine, who led a mission from Rome and became the very first Archbishop of Canterbury.
So the Anglo-Saxons settle in, they convert to Christianity, they establish kingdoms, but the peace doesn't last. The boats return.
Always. This time, the threat came from Scandinavia, the Vikings, from Denmark and Norway.
Right.
The text states they first visited in 789 AD, and initially it was just to raid coastal towns and monasteries for wealth. But eventually the raids turned into a full-scale invasion. They started forming their own communities, particularly in the east and north of England.
And the Anglo-Saxons obviously pushed back against this.
They do, under the leadership of King Alfred the Great.
Okay, Alfred the Great.
He was an Anglo-Saxon king who managed to unite the various local lords to defeat the Viking armies, essentially saving the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms from total annihilation.
Wow.
However, the Viking influence remained very strong. And at one point, a Danish king named Canute did successfully rule all of England for a short period.
And while all this chaotic shifting of power between Anglo-Saxons and Vikings is happening down south, what is happening up north? Because remember, the Romans never conquered it.
That's right. And actually, the persistent threat of Viking attacks served as a catalyst for unity in the north.
Really?
Yeah. The disparate tribes up there were forced to band together for survival under one king, Kenneth MacAlpin.
Kenneth MacAlpin.
Yes, and your text explicitly points out that it was during this period of unification that the term Scotland began to be used to describe that country.
Okay, so if we take a breath and look at the board,
Right.
we have the indigenous Celtics, the 400-year Roman occupation, the Anglo-Saxon cultural overwrite, and the Viking invasion.
A lot of layers.
It is. But then comes the singular event that arguably defines modern British history, 1066.
The Norman Conquest. In 1066, William, the Duke of Normandy, which is a region in modern-day northern France, launched a massive invasion across the English Channel.
And he meets the Anglo-Saxon king, Harold.
They clashed at the Battle of Hastings. William defeated King Harold, who was actually killed in the battle. William the Conqueror then marched on London and was crowned King of England.
And we have to pause here because this wasn't just a simple change in, upper management. The Norman conquest fundamentally re-engineered the country, didn't it?
Oh, it was a total societal restructuring. First, just from a historical record perspective, the Battle of Hastings itself is famously commemorated in the Bayeux Tapestry.
Oh, right, that massive piece of embroidery detailing the invasion.
Exactly. But more importantly for the structure of the country, William wanted absolute control and visibility over his new kingdom. So he commissioned the Domesday Book.
The Domesday Book, which sounds incredibly intimidating.
It does. It was essentially the ultimate medieval tax ledger. It was a massive, unprecedented inventory of the entire country. A list of all the towns, all the people who owned what land, and even what animals they owned.
Wow, so he literally counted the sheep.
He did. It allowed William to know exactly how much wealth his kingdom held and, consequently, exactly how much he could tax it.
It's brilliant administration, honestly, and culturally, the Normans brought something else that completely changed the trajectory of the country. Their language.
Yes. What's fascinating here is how the languages merged. For a long time after the conquest, there was a strict class divide reflected in language. The ruling Norman elites spoke Norman French, while the peasant class continued to speak Anglo-Saxon.
Okay.
But over centuries, these two distinct languages bled into one another, mixing vocabulary and grammar to create the English language as we essentially recognize it today.
Which perfectly transitions us into the Middle Ages, or the medieval period.
Right.
The sources frame this as roughly a 1,000-year stretch from the fall of Rome up to 1485. And the overarching theme the summary provides for this era is almost constant grinding war.
War was pretty much the primary mechanism of statecraft. The English kings spent much of the Middle Ages trying to aggressively expand their territory and consolidate control over the entire British Isles.
Let's look at how that played out regionally, starting with Wales.
In Wales, King Edward I successfully waged war and brought the territory under English control. In 1284, he introduced the Statute of Rhuddlan, which legally annexed Wales to the Crown of England.
Okay, 1284, Statute of Rhuddlan.
Exactly. And to maintain this power and suppress rebellions, the English built a network of massive, imposing stone castles, such as Conwy and Carnarvon.
And what about Ireland?
The English expansion into Ireland was a bit slower. By the year 1200, the English kings ruled over a relatively small, fortified area around Dublin, which was known as the Pale.
But Scotland, once again, proves to be the absolute thorn in the side of the English kings.
The Scottish fiercely maintained their independence. Despite numerous English invasions, the Scottish pushed back.
And there's a specific battle here, right?
Yes. The text requires you to know a pivotal moment in 1314, the Battle of Bannockburn.
Bannockburn.
Here, the Scottish forces, led by King Robert the Bruce, decisively defeated the English army, securing Scottish independence for centuries to come.
And while the English kings are fighting their neighbors locally, they are also looking across the water. They are participating in the Crusades, and they lock into a brutal, century-long conflict with France.
The 100 Years' War. This was a long, complex struggle over claims to the French throne and territory. The materials highlight one specific famous victory for the English that you need to know.
Which is?
A Battle of Agincourt in 1415, where King Henry V, despite being heavily outnumbered, used superior tactics and the English longbow to absolutely devastate the French army.
Okay, so it's an era defined by military campaigns, but amidst all this political warfare, nature intervenes with a biological catastrophe that literally reshapes society from the ground up.
Yes, the Black Death.
The Black Death.
This was a devastating plague that hit Britain starting in 1348. The mortality rate was almost incomprehensible. The text states it killed roughly 1/3 of the entire population.
1 in every 3 people. I mean, the sheer scale of the grief and the collapse of infrastructure is terrifying.
Yeah.
But here is where we have to really unpack the mechanics of what happens next.
Because it caused a huge shift.
Exactly. Because out of this unimaginable tragedy comes a massive, permanent shift in economic power for the peasants who actually survived.
It is a profound lesson in the economics of supply and demand, really. Before the plague, there was a surplus of peasant labor, which meant the landowning lords held all the power and could pay practically nothing.
Right.
But with 1/3 of the workforce suddenly dead, there was a severe critical labor shortage. The crop still needed harvesting, the animals still needed tending.
And the surviving peasants suddenly realize, wait a minute, you desperately need me. I'm not doing this for scraps anymore.
Exactly. The sudden scarcity of labor meant the surviving workers could demand higher wages and better living conditions, and the lords had no choice but to pay.
Wow.
This radical economic shift broke down the strict feudal system, allowed peasants to accumulate wealth, and directly led to the development of a stronger property middle class.
It is fascinating how a biological event forced a societal evolution like that.
Very much so.
And we also see massive forced evolution in the legal system during the Middle Ages, specifically regarding the power of the king, because up until now, the king essentially does whatever he wants.
Right, but that unchecked power began to end in 1215.
1215, what happened?
The English barons were furious with King John's arbitrary taxation and disastrous wars. They rebelled and forced him to sign a foundational document known as the Magna Carta.
The Great Charter. Why is this document so critical for the test?
Because it established a revolutionary precedent. The Magna Carta meant that the king's power was no longer absolute. It was controlled and limited by law.
Oh.
For instance, the king could no longer simply seize a noble's land or imprison a free man without a lawful judgment by his peers. It laid out the basic rights of the subjects and firmly established the concept that even the monarch is subject to the rule of law.
And the Magna Carta sets the stage for the creation of another institution that is going to become the center of British power, Parliament.
Yes. The concept of a council advising the king gradually formalized into Parliament. In England, it eventually split into 2 distinct houses.
Which are?
The House of Lords, representing the nobility and high clergy, and the House of Commons, representing the knights and wealthy merchants from the towns.
And Scotland was developing its own parliament simultaneously, but with a slight difference, right?
Correct. Scottish Parliament developed 3 estates, or houses, one for the Lords, one for the Commons, and a distinct third house specifically for the clergy.
So we have the emergence of legal rights and parliamentary structure. But the Middle Ages don't end peacefully. They end with a brutal, decades-long civil war between 2 extremely powerful families.
The Wars of the Roses. This conflict began in 1455. It was a vicious dynastic struggle to decide which faction should control the throne of England.
And who were the factions?
It was fought between the supporters of the House of Lancaster, whose heraldic symbol was a red rose, and the supporters of the House of York, whose symbol was a white rose.
Red versus white. It literally tore the nobility apart.
It raged on and off for 30 years, finally culminating at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485.
1485.
Yes. During this battle, King Richard III of the House of York was killed. The victor was Henry Tudor, representing the House of Lancaster. He was crowned King Henry VII.
And Henry VII realizes that if he doesn't unite these 2 warring factions, the Civil War is just going to start all over again.
So he made a brilliant political move. Henry Tudor, the Lancastrian, married Elizabeth of York, the niece of the man he had just killed.
Wow, okay.
This marriage physically united the 2 rival houses, ending the war. And to symbolize this new era of peace, their family symbol became the Tudor rose, a red rose with a white rose nestled inside it.
Which is such a powerful image. Time for quiz 2, listener. Which document limited the power of the king in 1215?
That would be the Magna Carta.
Perfect. So that brings us right into the Tudor dynasty. We've established the borders, the language, the early parliaments. Now, the Tudors are going to take that established nation and completely upend its religion.
Yes. So Henry VII was a shrewd administrator who rebuilt the country's wealth after the Civil War. But it was his son, Henry VIII, whose personal desires initiated a geopolitical earthquake.
Yeah, I always think of Henry VIII like a ruthless corporate CEO.
Well, that's a good
He
analogy.
has this massive corporation in England, but he's obsessed with the fact that he doesn't have a clear male successor to take over when he dies.
Right.
He has a daughter, Mary, with his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, but he desperately wants a son to secure the Tudor dynasty.
And Catherine is past childbearing age.
Mhm.
So Henry decides he needs a divorce so he can marry someone younger.
Which is a problem back then.
A huge problem. Because England was a Catholic country, and divorce required special permission from the Pope in Rome.
Hmm.
And the Pope, due to complex European politics involving Catherine's powerful relatives, flatly refused to grant it.
So Henry, acting like that ruthless CEO, just says, fine. If the parent company won't authorize the merger, I am severing ties entirely.
He did exactly that. Henry broke away from the Church of Rome entirely. He founded the Church of England and declared himself its supreme head.
Unbelievable.
This allowed him to grant his own divorce. And you mentioned the CEO liquidating assets earlier. That is precisely what happened.
Really?
Yes. Henry dissolved the wealthy Catholic monasteries across England, seizing their massive lands and riches to fund his own military campaigns.
It is an incredible power grab. And it happens right as the Protestant Reformation is sweeping across Europe, which gives him ideological cover. Now, for the test, they love to ask about the human cost of Henry's obsession with a male heir. You absolutely have to know his 6 wives.
Yes, the sources provide a specific list that you must commit to memory. First was Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess, whom he divorced. She was the mother of Mary.
Okay, that's one.
Second was Anne Boleyn. She gave birth to Elizabeth, but failed to provide a son, and Henry had her executed for treason.
Executed. 2 down.
Third was Jane Seymour. She finally gave Henry his desperately wanted male heir, Edward, but she tragically died shortly after childbirth.
That's 3.
Fourth was Anne of Cleves, a German princess. That was a political marriage that Henry quickly annulled. Fifth was Catherine Howard, a much younger woman who was also accused of treason and executed.
Good grief. 5.
And the sixth and final wife was Catherine Parr, who actually outlived him.
Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. That's the rhyme to remember. So Henry finally dies, and his long-awaited son, Edward VI, takes the throne.
Right. Edward VI was raised as a strict Protestant. During his reign, the English Reformation deepened. The Book of Common Prayer was introduced, standardizing Protestant worship in English rather than Latin. However, Edward was sickly and died very young, at just 15 years old.
Leaving a massive crisis because the only heirs left are Henry's daughters, and the oldest is Mary.
Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. And Mary was a fervent, devout Catholic.
Oh, boy.
When she took the throne, she immediately set about reversing her father and brother's work. She violently swung the country back to Catholicism, aggressively persecuting and executing hundreds of Protestants, burning many at the stake.
Which is horrific.
It was. This horrific violence earned her the infamous nickname Bloody Mary.
But Mary's reign is relatively short. She dies, and her half-sister Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, takes over.
Queen Elizabeth I. She is widely considered one of the most successful monarchs in British history. Elizabeth was a Protestant, and she immediately reestablished the Church of England as the official state church.
Okay, so back to Protestantism.
Yes, but critically, the text notes she was pragmatic. She sought a religious settlement, trying to find a balance that would stop the constant bloodshed between radical Protestants and devout Catholics.
So she stabilizes the internal turmoil. But externally, she faces a massive existential threat from Spain.
Spain was the dominant Catholic superpower of the era. King Philip II of Spain saw Protestant England as a threat and decided to invade, overthrow Elizabeth, and restore Catholicism.
With a huge fleet, right?
In 1588, he sent a massive fleet of ships, the Spanish Armada.
But the English are ready.
They were. The English fleet, using smaller, more maneuverable ships and aided by severe storms, completely defeated the Armada.
Wow.
The text specifically highlights the role of Sir Francis Drake, a famous privateer and explorer who served as one of the key English commanders during the battle.
So Elizabeth I secures England. But what is happening in Scotland while the Tudors are tearing England apart over religion?
The Protestant Reformation had reached Scotland as well. In 1560, the Scottish Parliament officially abolished the authority of the Pope.
Okay.
The complication was that the Scottish monarch, Mary Queen of Scots, was a Catholic.
Which creates an immediate severe friction with her Protestant nobles.
Exactly. The situation became so politically unstable that Mary was forced to abdicate, to give up her throne. She passed the crown to her infant son, James VI, who was then raised as a Protestant.
And where did Mary go?
Mary fled south into England, seeking refuge with her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I.
But Elizabeth doesn't exactly welcome her with open arms, does she?
Not at all. Elizabeth saw Mary as a severe political threat. Because Mary was a Catholic with a legitimate blood claim to the English throne, she became a figurehead for Catholic plots against Elizabeth.
Right.
Consequently, Elizabeth kept Mary as a prisoner for nearly 20 years before finally ordering her execution.
The family dynamics are just brutal, but here is where the story takes a massive geographical turn. Elizabeth I reigns for 45 years, but she never marries and she never has children. So when she dies in 1603, the Tudor line dies with her. Who gets the throne?
The crown passed to her closest living relative, her cousin's son, James VI of Scotland. He traveled to London and was crowned King James I of England, Wales, and Ireland.
Okay, let me make sure the mechanism here is clear. The King of Scotland literally just inherits the entire country of England. Do the two countries merge?
No, they did not merge politically at this point. They remained two entirely separate sovereign countries with their own parliaments and their own legal systems.
Ah, I see.
But they were now ruled by the same individual monarch. This is known as the Union of the Crowns.
Got it.
And James I's reign is also culturally significant because he commissioned a new, authoritative English translation of the Bible, the King James Version, which remains widely used to this day.
Okay, so the Stuarts have arrived. James I rules, and then his son, Charles I, inherits the throne. And Charles I is where the relationship between the monarchy and the parliament completely breaks down.
It does. Charles I had a fatal flaw as a ruler. He fervently believed in the divine right of kings.
Which means what?
This is the deeply held theological belief that a king derives his right to rule directly from God, and therefore he is not accountable to any earthly authority, least of all an elected parliament.
Which is a bold stance to take when Parliament controls all the tax money.
Exactly. Charles essentially tried to govern as an absolute monarch. Whenever Parliament refused to fund his foreign wars or criticized his policies, he simply dissolved them.
He just sent them home.
Yes. In fact, he stubbornly ruled for 11 straight years without calling Parliament into session at all, finding increasingly unpopular ways to extract money from the public.
So he just ignores them until he suddenly can't.
Right. He made a critical error by trying to force a new English-style prayer book on the Scottish Presbyterian Church. The Scottish rebelled, and Charles suddenly needed a massive army to fight them.
And armies cost money.
Precisely. He had no choice but to recall Parliament to ask for the funds.
And Parliament, who has been sidelined for 11 years, is absolutely furious. They demand massive concessions. They demand control over the army. Charles refuses, and things escalate to the point where Charles physically storms the House of Commons with armed guards to arrest 5 members of Parliament.
It was an unprecedented breach of constitutional norms. The arrests failed, the king fled London, and the country plunged into the English Civil War in the 1640s.
The ultimate showdown. The king versus Parliament.
The war deeply divided the nation. It was fought between the king's royalist supporters, who were known as the Cavaliers, and Parliament's supporters, who were nicknamed the Roundheads because of their short haircuts.
And despite the king believing he has God on his side, Parliament has the better army.
They did. Parliament created a highly disciplined professional force called the New Model Army. The royalist forces were decisively crushed at major conflicts, like the Battle of Marston Moor and the Battle of Naseby.
Okay.
By 1646, Charles I had lost the war and was taken prisoner.
And here is where British history does something truly radical.
In 1649, Parliament put King Charles I on trial for treason against his own people. He was found guilty and publicly executed by beheading in London.
They executed God's anointed king. That shockwave must have been felt across the entire globe. So what replaces the monarchy?
England was immediately declared a republic, an era sometimes called the Commonwealth. The country was governed by Oliver Cromwell, a fiercely puritanical general who had led Parliament's army.
Okay.
Cromwell eventually took the title of Lord Protector, essentially ruling as a military dictator.
And how did Cromwell handle the rest of the British Isles? Because Scotland and Ireland had their own royalist sympathies.
Cromwell dealt with them ruthlessly, When royalist revolts broke out in Ireland and Scotland, Cromwell led military campaigns to crush them.
Hmm.
The text specifically notes that his campaigns, particularly in Ireland, involved significant force and violence, leaving a deep legacy of bitterness.
But the Republic is essentially tied entirely to Cromwell's personal charisma and military strength. When he
Mhm.
dies, the whole system starts to wobble.
Yes, his son Richard lacked his father's authority, and the country faced the threat of plunging back into civil war and anarchy. The political elite realized the Republic was failing.
So awkwardly, Parliament has to reach out to the son of the king they just beheaded.
It's quite a turn of events. This period is known as the Restoration. In 1660, Parliament invited Charles II to return from exile in Europe and reclaim his throne.
Okay.
The monarchy was restored, but with a renewed understanding that the king had to work alongside Parliament.
Charles II gets his throne back, but his reign is immediately hit by two massive apocalyptic disasters in London.
The text highlights them clearly. First, in 1665, a major outbreak of the plague decimated London, killing tens of thousands of people.
1665, the plague.
Then, the very next year, in 1666, the Great Fire of London broke out. It raged for days, destroying much of the medieval city, including the original St. Paul's Cathedral.
But despite the fire and the plague, Charles II's reign is also marked by a massive leap forward in logic, science, and the law.
It was an intellectual renaissance, really. Charles II was a great patron of the sciences, leading to the formation of the Royal Society, an institution dedicated to scientific discovery.
Who was in that?
Its members included luminaries like Sir Isaac Newton, who formulated the laws of gravity, and Edmund Halley, who predicted the return of the famous comet.
And legally, there is a massive breakthrough regarding individual liberty.
The Habeas Corpus Act of 1679. This is one of the most important legal concepts in British history.
Let's really explain the mechanics of this because it sounds like dry legal jargon, but it's actually about life and death.
Absolutely. Habeas corpus is Latin for you must present the person in court. Before this act, a king or a powerful lord could simply throw someone into a dungeon indefinitely because they didn't like them without ever charging them with a crime.
Wow.
The Habeas Corpus Act made that illegal. It guaranteed that anyone who was arrested had a right to a court hearing. The state had to publicly prove they had a lawful reason to hold you or they had to let you go. It is the cornerstone of freedom from arbitrary arrest.
A huge leap forward. But the political stability of the Restoration doesn't last. Charles II dies without a legitimate heir. His brother, James II, takes over. And James II has a very big political problem in the eyes of Parliament. He is Catholic.
And James II lacked his brother's political tact. He immediately began appointing Catholics to powerful positions in the army and the government, which Parliament had explicitly forbidden.
That's a recipe for disaster.
It was. The Protestant majority feared that James II was determined to turn England back into a Catholic country, potentially using his new Catholic army officers to enforce his will.
So Parliament decides they aren't going to wait for a civil war this time. They take proactive, drastic action.
They engineered what became known as the Glorious Revolution. In 1688, a group of influential Protestant nobles sent a secret invitation to James II's daughter Mary, who was a Protestant, and her husband William of Orange, who was the Dutch Protestant leader.
An invitation to do what?
They invited William to invade England with the Dutch army and take the throne.
And William accepts the invitation. He lands his army, and James II, realizing he has lost the support of the country, just flees to France without fighting.
Exactly. Because it was achieved without a bloody civil war, it was termed the Glorious or Bloodless Revolution. William and Mary became joint monarchs.
But Parliament isn't just going to hand them the keys without some ground rules. This brings us to a massive, defining moment. If I'm tracking the constitutional evolution here, the Magna Carta in 1215 put the very first leash on the king. The English Civil War proved Parliament could fight back. But it's right here, with William and Mary, that the monarchy is permanently chained to the law.
That is precisely the mechanism. Before William and Mary were allowed to be crowned in 1689, Parliament forced them to sign a document called the Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights.
This document fundamentally and permanently shifted the balance of power. It explicitly confirmed that the monarch could no longer raise a standing army during peacetime, could no longer invent new taxes, and could no longer interfere with the administration of justice without the direct, explicit agreement of Parliament.
It is the absolute birth of the constitutional monarchy. The king is still the head of state, but Parliament holds the purse strings and makes the laws.
That is exactly the political foundation that allowed Britain to enter the 18th and 19th centuries with internal stability, allowing them to turn their ambitions outward toward the rest of the globe.
Which transitions us into our next major era. Quick quiz 3, though. Who ruled Britain as Lord Protector during its brief period as a republic?
That would be Oliver Cromwell.
Correct. All right, on to the empire, industry, and the 20th century. With the king's power checked, the nation starts organizing itself differently.
Politically, the 18th century began with a massive structural change. In 1707, the Act of Union, known as the Treaty of Union in Scotland, was passed.
What did that do?
This formally and politically united the countries of England and Scotland, creating a single nation known as the Kingdom of Great Britain, with one unified parliament sitting in London.
Okay, and how is that parliament operating now that the king's power is limited? Who is actually running the day-to-day government?
The power of Parliament, specifically the House of Commons, was rapidly increasing. This shift was accelerated by King George I.
George F.S.
He was a German prince who inherited the throne, and because he spoke very little English, he relied heavily on his most senior ministers to run the country.
Ah, naturally.
And the most important of these ministers evolved into a new role known as the Prime Minister.
Basically the CEO of the government.
Exactly. The text identifies Sir Robert Walpole as the man universally recognized as the first prime minister, serving from 1721 to 1742.
So the political machinery is modernized. And at the exact same time, the physical and economic machinery of the country undergoes a violent, rapid transformation, the Industrial Revolution.
This was a seismic shift from an agrarian farming-based society to an urban, mechanized industrial powerhouse. The development of steam power and new machinery meant goods could be produced in massive quantities far faster than human hands could manage.
The sources highlight some specific pioneers of this era, right?
You need to know Richard Arkwright, who vastly improved the efficiency of the textile industry by developing horse-driven and later steam-powered spinning mills. This moved weaving out of small cottages and into massive factories.
And you need heavy materials to build those factories and the transport systems.
Which is where the Bessemer process comes in. It allowed for the cheap mass production of high-quality steel. This steel was then used to build massive shipbuilding yards and an extensive network of railways.
And speaking of railways, the text highlights the brilliant engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel.
Yes, Brunel. He was instrumental in designing incredibly ambitious bridges, deep tunnels, and the Great Western Railway, physically connecting the industrial centers of the country.
But all of this rapid economic expansion, the raw materials, the global trade networks, we have to acknowledge the dark, brutal foundation it was built upon.
Yes, we do. The text is very clear about the role of the transatlantic slave trade. While it was technically illegal to own a slave within Britain itself, slavery was a massive, fully established overseas industry by the 18th century, and it was utterly dominated by British and American commercial interests.
What were the actual mechanics of this trade, as outlined?
It was a horrific commercial triangle. Enslaved people were violently kidnapped from West Africa, transported across the Atlantic in unimaginably terrible, deadly conditions, and forced to work on vast tobacco and sugar plantations in the Americas and the Caribbean.
And the money.
The immense profits from these plantations flowed directly back to fuel British industrial growth.
But public sentiment eventually turns against this atrocity.
The abolition movement was slow but persistent. The text notes that the first formal anti-slavery groups were established by the Quakers, a religious society, in the late 1700s.
Okay.
The movement gained political traction under leaders like William Wilberforce, a deeply religious member of Parliament who campaigned relentlessly against the trade.
And the legislative victories come in stages, don't they?
First, in 1807, Parliament passed a law making it illegal to trade slaves in British ships. But slavery itself still existed in the colonies.
When did that end?
It wasn't until the Emancipation Act of 1833 that slavery was finally and completely abolished throughout the entire British Empire.
Let's pivot to the global conflicts of this era, because the British military is heavily engaged worldwide. First, they actually lose a major chunk of their territory.
The American colonies. The colonists, frustrated by being heavily taxed by the British Parliament without having any elected representation in that parliament, declared their independence in 1776.
And they fight a war over it.
After a protracted war, Britain finally recognized the independence of the United States in 1783.
But the much bigger, closer threat was France.
Britain was almost constantly at war with France during this period. Following the French Revolution in 1789, a series of global wars erupted. eventually pitting Britain against the military genius of Emperor Napoleon.
The text requires you to know two absolutely defining battles from this era, one at sea, one on land.
Exactly. At sea, the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. The brilliant Admiral Nelson decisively destroyed the combined French and Spanish fleets, permanently securing British dominance of the oceans.
Though Nelson didn't survive it.
No, Nelson himself was killed by a sniper during the battle.
And the final showdown on land.
The Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Here, a coalition army, led by the British Duke of Wellington, often called the Iron Duke, finally and permanently defeated Napoleon's forces, ending the French threat.
And with France defeated, Britain enters the 19th century essentially unchallenged globally. This brings us to Queen Victoria and the Victorian Age.
Queen Victoria had an incredibly long reign, from 1837 to 1901. This era represents the absolute zenith of British imperial power.
The scale of the empire is just staggering.
During her reign, the British Empire expanded to encompass India, Australia, Canada, and vast swaths of Africa. By the end of her life, the empire governed a population of over 400 million people worldwide.
Wow.
At home, the immense wealth flowing in from the empire led to significantly improved living conditions, particularly for the rapidly expanding middle class, driven by ongoing industrial innovation.
The military is active during this time as well, projecting power. The text mentions the Crimean War.
Fought between 1853 and 1856, Britain allied with France and Turkey to fight against an expanding Russia. While the war was chaotic, it is deeply remembered for the pioneering work of Florence Nightingale.
Oh, right, the famous nurse.
She went to the military hospitals in Crimea and completely revolutionized the standards of nursing, hygiene, and hospital administration, saving countless lives and establishing nursing as a respected profession.
Now, I have to point out something critical in the text here regarding the empire. During much of the Victorian era, the domestic narrative was that the empire was a force for good, bringing civilization and infrastructure to the world. But the text explicitly notes that this narrative starts to fracture violently at the end of her reign.
It does. The materials specifically point to the Boer War, fought between 1899 and 1902. This was a brutal conflict in South Africa. The British Empire went to war against the Boers, who were settlers of Dutch descent.
And the British tactics were heavily criticized, right?
Right. Very much so. The British military violently crushed the Boer resistance, utilizing deeply controversial methods, including horrific concentration camps, where thousands of civilians died of disease and starvation.
Wow.
The text emphasizes that this brutal, heavily publicized war caused a profound moral shock back in Britain. It led many people to seriously question and doubt the comforting narrative that the empire was inherently a force for good.
It's a crucial nuance for the test. Now, during this whole era of unification and imperial expansion, the physical symbol of the nation, the flag, takes its final form. And this is a very common area for test questions. Let's visualize the Union flag and build it layer by layer.
The Union flag is a composite design overlapping three distinct heraldic crosses. First, you have the patron saint of England, St. George. His symbol is a solid red cross on a white background.
Okay, St. George, red cross on white.
Second, you overlay the patron saint of Scotland, St. Andrew. His symbol is a white diagonal cross on a blue background.
Right.
Finally, you add the patron saint of Ireland, St. Patrick. His symbol is a red diagonal cross on a white background.
So you layer the red cross, the white diagonal, and the red diagonal, and you get the Union flag. But wait, we talked about four nations in the UK. Where's the Welsh dragon? Why isn't Wales represented?
It comes down to a historical technicality. When the very first version of the Union flag was created in 1606, following the Union of the Crowns, the Principality of Wales had already been formally annexed and united with England centuries earlier by Edward I.
Ah, okay.
Therefore, politically speaking, Wales was considered part of the English entity, and so it wasn't given its own distinct element on the flag.
A tough break for the Welsh dragon, but a crucial historical detail to remember. Okay, quiz 4. What three crosses make up the Union flag, and why isn't the Welsh dragon on it?
Well, St. George, St. Andrew, and St. Patrick. And no dragon because Wales was already united with England.
Perfect. So the Victorian era ends, and we slam into the 20th century, and the pace of change here is just staggering.
The 20th century is characterized by rapid social democratization and unimaginable global conflict. Socially, the most profound shift was the expansion of voting rights.
Right.
For centuries, voting was restricted entirely to wealthy, property-owning men.
But the suffragette movement fights relentlessly to change that.
And they eventually succeed. In 1918, Parliament finally passed an act granting the right to vote to women over the age of 30 as long as they met certain property qualifications.
And then they expanded it further.
Yes, a decade later, in 1928, the law was equalized entirely, giving all men and women over the age of 21 the right to vote, regardless of property.
But that social progress was overshadowed by the horror of the First World War.
WWI erupted in 1914 following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Britain entered the war as part of the Allied powers, fighting against the Central Powers led by Germany. The warfare was industrialized and brutal, defined by trenches and machine guns.
The human cost is almost impossible to grasp.
To illustrate that cost, the materials specifically require you to know about the Battle of the Somme in 1916. It was a catastrophic offensive.
How bad was it?
On the very first day of the battle alone, British forces suffered an unfathomable 60,000 casualties.
Just on the first day?
Yes. The trauma of the war deeply scarred the nation before it finally ended on November 11, 1918.
And returning home from that war, the political map of the UK fractures. Ireland had been fighting for independence, and in 1922, a radical compromise is reached.
Yes, the island of Ireland was partitioned. The 6 counties in the north, which had a Protestant majority, chose to remain part of the United Kingdom, becoming Northern Ireland.
Right.
The rest of the island, which was predominantly Catholic, became an independent state, eventually known as the Republic of Ireland.
But partitioning the country didn't solve the underlying tensions.
Unfortunately not. The partition left a significant Catholic minority within Northern Ireland who faced discrimination and wanted to join the Republic. This deep division ultimately led to decades of sectarian violence and terrorism from the late 1960s onward.
A dark period grimly referred to as the Troubles.
Yes.
While that tension is simmering, the 1930s plunge the world into the Great Depression. The global economy collapses, creating desperate conditions that allow fascism to rise in Europe. Hitler comes to power in Germany, leading directly to the Second World War.
Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939 triggered the war. Britain once again fought with the Allies, this time against the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan.
The text highlights several key events from WWII that are essential for the test. First, a massive rescue mission early in the war.
The evacuation at Dunkirk. In 1940, the British Army was trapped on the beaches of France by advancing German forces.
How did they get out?
In an incredible operation, a flotilla of naval vessels and hundreds of civilian small boats managed to evacuate over 300,000 soldiers back across the Channel, saving the army to fight another day.
But then the war comes directly to the skies over Britain.
The Battle of Britain. Germany attempted to destroy the Royal Air Force to pave the way for a ground invasion. It was a desperate, prolonged aerial battle, but the British pilots, aided by the newly invented technology of radar, successfully repelled the German Luftwaffe.
And that was followed by the bombings.
Yes, the Blitz, a devastating campaign of nighttime bombing against London and other industrial cities aimed at breaking civilian morale.
And then the turning point in Europe.
D-Day in 1944, a massive Allied invasion force crossed the English Channel and landed on the beaches of Normandy in France, beginning the long, bloody push to liberate Western Europe from Nazi control, culminating in the defeat of Germany in 1945.
And the man steering Britain through the darkest days of that war was Winston Churchill.
Churchill became prime minister in 1940. He was a phenomenal orator. When the situation seemed hopeless, his defiant, inspirational speeches, refusing to surrender, promising to fight on the beaches, provided the crucial psychological strength the country needed to survive.
He's a huge figure.
He remains a towering figure. The text notes that in a 2002 public poll, he was voted the greatest Briton of all time.
But the moment the war is won in 1945, the British public does something remarkable. The country is completely bankrupt, cities are bombed out, everyone is exhausted. And instead of keeping the great wartime leader, they vote Churchill out of office in a landslide.
The public didn't want wartime rhetoric anymore. They wanted a completely new vision for peacetime society. They elected a radical labor government led by Prime Minister Clement Attlee.
And Attlee's government fundamentally rewrites the social contract we talked about at the very beginning.
They did. The Attlee government introduced the modern welfare state. This was a sweeping set of reforms designed to protect citizens from the cradle to the grave.
So what did they actually do?
They nationalized key industries like coal and rail. They created a comprehensive social security system to provide financial support for the unemployed and the elderly.
But the crown jewel of the welfare state, the thing that defines modern Britain.
The National Health Service, the NHS, established in 1948. This was revolutionary. It guaranteed that medical care would be provided to every citizen, funded through general taxation, and critically, it would be entirely free at the point of use.
So the political structure changes, and at the same time, the actual demographic makeup of the people living in the UK begins to change dramatically.
Because of the massive casualties of the war and the urgent need to rebuild the bombed-out cities and staff the new NHS, Britain faced a severe labor shortage in the 1950s.
So they needed workers.
Exactly. To solve this, the government actively recruited workers from across the British Empire and the Commonwealth, encouraging mass immigration from places like the West Indies, India, and Pakistan. This influx transformed the UK into the multicultural society it is today.
The 1960s follow with another massive cultural shift. The economy booms and society becomes much more liberal.
The 1960s saw sweeping social reforms. Laws were passed to liberalize divorce, to legalize abortion under certain conditions, and to decriminalize homosexuality.
Right.
Parliament also passed the Equal Pay Act to mandate that women receive the same pay as men for doing the same work.
Jumping forward, the UK ties itself economically to Europe in 1973 by joining the EEC. But by the late 70s, the economy is stalling, there are massive union strikes, and the country pivots hard in the opposite direction from Attlee's welfare state.
They elected Margaret Thatcher in 1979, the UK's first female prime minister. She was a fiercely conservative leader known as the Iron Lady. She believed the state was too large and inefficient.
So she dismantled it.
Much of it, yes. Her government dismantled much of the post-war consensus by aggressively privatizing nationalized industries, selling off state-owned telecommunications, gas, and rail companies, and actively reducing the power of the trade unions, shifting the economy heavily toward financial services.
She remains a deeply polarizing figure. Finally, to round out the 20th century, we return to the violence in Northern Ireland.
After decades of sectarian bloodshed during the Troubles, a major political breakthrough occurred in 1998 under Tony Blair's Labour government.
The Good Friday Agreement.
Yes, the Good Friday Agreement was signed by the opposing factions and the governments of the UK and Ireland. It established a power-sharing devolved government in Northern Ireland, bringing a formal and lasting end to the vast majority of the violence.
Okay, let's take a mental breath. We've covered everything from Stone Age farmers to the Good Friday Agreement. We've seen how the country was physically built, fought over, and socially re-engineered. Now, we need to look at what that society actually looks like today. Section 5, Modern Society.
Let's examine the modern demographic data provided in the text. Today, the population of the UK is over 66 million. However, it is not distributed evenly. It is heavily concentrated, with 84% of the population living in England.
And as we discussed with the post-war rebuilding, it is a much more diverse population now.
Very much so. The legacy of post-war immigration means that today, nearly 10% of the UK population has a parent or grandparent who was born outside of the UK.
How does that diversity interact with the country's official religion? Because technically, we are still living with the consequences of Henry VIII wanting a divorce.
Legally and historically, the UK remains officially a Christian country. The established state church is the Protestant Church of England. The reigning monarch retains the title of Supreme Governor of the Church.
Right.
However, the day-to-day spiritual leadership is handled by the Archbishop of Canterbury, who, interestingly, is selected by the Prime Minister.
But the text is very careful to note that official doesn't mean exclusive.
Exactly. The materials heavily emphasize that modern Britain is a multiracial, multicultural society. The law fiercely protects freedom of religion, and there is deep societal respect for all faiths, accommodating festivals and practices from Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, Judaism, and many others.
Moving from culture to science, I like to describe the historical UK as a giant inventor's garage for the world. The sheer volume of world-changing concepts developed here is incredible.
The sources require you to know a specific list of 20th century British innovations. In communication, the television was developed by the Scottish engineer John Logie Baird in the 1920s.
TV, that's a big one.
In defense, radar was developed by Robert Watson Watt, which, as we noted, was crucial during the Battle of Britain. In medicine, the life-saving antibiotic penicillin was discovered by Alexander Fleming.
The ATM cash machine, the Concorde supersonic jet, the hovercraft.
Yes, and profound breakthroughs in modern biology. The UK pioneered IVF therapy for fertility. British scientists at Cambridge discovered the double helix structure of the DNA molecule. And scientists in Scotland were the first to successfully clone a mammal, the famous Dolly the sheep.
And culturally, the literature has shaped the global imagination.
The text highlights William Shakespeare, writing during the Elizabethan era. He was deeply associated with the Globe Theatre in London, and his plays and poetry have had an immeasurable influence on the vocabulary and structure of the English language.
Anyone else?
Moving to the Victorian era, the text mentions Rudyard Kipling, an author and poet who wrote extensively about the British Empire in India and who became the first English language writer to win the Nobel Prize in Literature.
If you are looking to explore the physical beauty of the UK, the materials point out landmarks like Kew Gardens in London, famous for its massive botanical collection. There is also a network of 15 national parks spread across England, Wales, and Scotland, protecting vast areas of natural beauty.
And finally, in terms of leisure, we must discuss sports, because Britain essentially codified the rules for many of the world's most popular games and exported them globally.
Let's run through them.
The modern game of golf can be directly traced back to 15th century Scotland, with St. Andrews recognized as the historic home of the sport. The rules for modern lawn tennis evolved in England in the late 19th century, leading to Wimbledon becoming the oldest and most prestigious tournament in the world.
Right, Wimbledon.
The UK also has a dominant history in motorsports, particularly Formula One engineering, and in water sports, the text highlights adventurous figures like Sir Francis Chichester, who became the first person to sail single-handed around the world by the Clipper route.
Quiz 5. Who developed the television in the 1920s?
That was John Logie Baird.
Excellent. So, we know the history, we know the culture. This brings us to Section 6, the final and perhaps most practically important section for someone looking to live in the UK. The rule book.
Right.
We need to break down how the government operates today and the laws that bind society together. And we have to start with the concept of the Constitution, because if you come from almost any other country, the British system sounds absolutely bizarre. How does a modern democracy function with an unwritten constitution?
It is a highly unique system. Unlike the United States or France, the British Constitution is not a single, unified, written document that you can go look at in a museum. Instead, it is an organic, evolving collection of different sources.
So what holds it together?
Three main pillars. First, hundreds of years of specific laws and acts passed by Parliament, like the Habeas Corpus Act or the Bill of Rights we discussed. Second, unwritten conventions. These are deep-seated historical traditions about how political actors are expected to behave, even if it isn't strictly illegal to do otherwise. And third, long-standing institutions like the monarchy and the courts.
Let's look closely at those institutions. We talked about the Bill of Rights limiting the king. What exactly does the monarch do today?
Today, the UK is a strict constitutional monarchy. The monarch is the head of state, but their role is entirely ceremonial and diplomatic. They do not govern the country. They act on the advice of their ministers. Following an election, the monarch formally appoints the prime minister chosen by the people. They also participate in traditions like the state opening of Parliament, where they read the Queen's or King's speech, a document actually written by the government outlining their legislative plans for the year.
So the real functional power resides entirely in Parliament.
Yes. Parliament is a bicameral legislature, meaning it has two chambers. The House of Commons is the dominant chamber, made up of elected members of Parliament, or MPs. The House of Lords is the second chamber, made up of appointed peers. Their main job is to review and refine legislation sent up from the Commons, though they cannot ultimately block the Commons from passing a law.
And who is actually running the departments? The schools, the hospitals, the military?
That is the executive branch, led by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the leader of the political party that wins a majority in the House of Commons. The PM then appoints a cabinet, a group of about 20 senior MPs from their party, to become ministers in charge of specific government departments like health, education, or defense.
And what happens to the political party that lost the election? Do they just go home?
No, they play a vital constitutional role. The largest party not in power forms Her or His Majesty's official opposition. Their leader's job is to publicly scrutinize the government, point out weaknesses in their policies, and offer alternatives. They even form a shadow cabinet, appointing their own MPs to mirror the government ministers, ready to take over if they win the next election.
And with all these opposing politicians debating in the House of Commons, it gets famously rowdy. Who keeps them in line?
That is the role of the Speaker. The Speaker is the chief officer of the House of Commons. Crucially, upon being elected by the other MPs to the role, the Speaker must become strictly politically neutral, resigning from their political party. Their job is to maintain order during intense debates, decide who gets to speak, and ensure the complex rules of Parliament are followed.
Let's talk about the mechanics of how these MPs actually get their jobs. Voting systems.
For general elections, which elect MPs to the House of Commons and must be held at least every 5 years, the UK uses a system called first past the post.
How does that work?
The country is divided into local areas called constituencies. In each constituency, you vote for one candidate. The candidate who gets the most votes wins the seat. They don't need a majority of all votes, they just need more votes than anyone else.
But the text notes that isn't the only system used.
Correct. For European parliamentary elections, at least as defined in the specific edition of the materials you are studying, a system of proportional representation is used. In this system, seats are allocated to political parties based roughly on the total percentage of votes they receive across a larger region, rather than a winner-takes-all local race.
We also talked earlier about how the UK is made up of 4 nations. Historically, everything was run out of London. But that changed recently, didn't it?
It changed significantly in the late 1990s through a process called devolution. The central government in London recognized that policies suitable for England weren't always appropriate for the other nations, so they devolved or transferred certain decision-making powers back to local authorities.
So what did they create?
They established a Scottish Parliament, a Welsh Assembly, and a Northern Ireland Assembly. These devolved administrations now have the power to make their own laws regarding local issues like education, healthcare, and transport within their own borders.
But they aren't independent countries. London still holds the big levers of power.
Precisely. The central UK government in Westminster retains absolute control over macro-level matters that affect the whole UK. These are reserved powers, and they include national defense, foreign affairs, immigration, national taxation, and the social security system.
Speaking of foreign affairs, the UK doesn't operate in a vacuum. It is deeply embedded in international institutions.
The sources list 4 key international organizations you must recognize. First, the Commonwealth. This is a voluntary association of 56 independent countries, the vast majority of which were formerly part of the British Empire. They cooperate on issues like democracy and development, and the monarch serves as the ceremonial head.
Second is the Council of Europe.
The Council of Europe has 47 member states. It is entirely separate from the European Union. Its primary function is the promotion of human rights and democracy, and it is responsible for the European Convention on Human Rights.
Third, on a global scale, the United Nations.
The UK is a founding member of the UN and, crucially, holds one of the 5 permanent seats on the UN Security Council, giving it significant influence over global security decisions and peacekeeping operations.
And finally, military alliances.
NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This is a defensive military alliance between North American and European countries committed to mutual defense and maintaining peace.
Okay, let's bring the focus right back down to the local, street level, the law. How is justice actually administered in your neighborhood? Because, just like the government, the legal system isn't perfectly uniform across the UK.
You must first understand the fundamental split between the 2 branches of law, civil law and criminal law. Criminal law deals with offenses against the state like theft or assault. The police investigate these crimes.
And who manages the police?
The day-to-day operations of local police forces are headed by professional police officers called chief constables. However, democratic oversight is provided by police and crime commissioners, or PCCs, who are directly elected by the public to hold the police accountable and set local policing priorities.
So if the police arrest someone and charge them with a serious crime, where do they go? Because we've established that Scotland operates differently.
Yes, the court systems are distinct. Let's look at serious criminal offenses, like murder or armed robbery. In England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, serious crimes are tried in the Crown Court. Here, a judge oversees the trial, but a jury of 12 randomly selected members of the public listens to the evidence and decides if the person is guilty or not guilty.
But in Scotland?
In Scotland, serious cases go to the Sheriff Court, which notably uses a jury of 15 members, not 12. For the most severe crimes, cases are elevated to the High Court in Scotland.
What if it's a minor crime, shoplifting or a public order offense?
In England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, minor crimes are processed quickly in the magistrate's court. Interestingly, these are usually presided over not by professional judges, but by a panel of unpaid, trained local volunteers known as magistrates, supported by a professional legal advisor. In Scotland, minor offenses are handled similarly by the Justice of the Peace Court.
And the system handles youth offenders entirely differently to keep them out of adult prisons if possible.
Correct. Children aged 10 to 17 who commit crimes are generally dealt with in specialized youth courts in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Scotland uses a unique welfare-based children's hearing system, and the materials highlight that Northern Ireland also utilizes a system called youth conferencing, which brings the offender and the victim together to find a restorative resolution for serious offenses.
Okay, that is criminal law. What about civil law? What if I'm just suing my contractor because they didn't finish my roof?
Civil disputes arguments between individuals or organizations about money, property, or contracts go to different courts. In England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, these are handled by the county courts. In Scotland, they go to the sheriff court.
And there are limits for what is considered a small claim that can be handled quickly.
Yes, the text provides specific monetary limits for small claims procedures. In Northern Ireland, a small claim is a dispute over an amount under £3,000. In England and Wales, the limit is higher, covering disputes under £10,000.
All right, we need to talk about the final civic responsibility, the thing nobody enjoys, but everyone must participate in: taxation. How does the government actually fund the NHS, the schools, and the military?
The primary engine of government revenue is income tax. This is a tax taken out of the money you earn. For the vast majority of employed people, this is handled invisibly through a system called pay as you earn. Your employer automatically calculates your tax, deducts it from your paycheck, and sends it directly to the government before you ever see it.
But if you run your own business, you have to do the math yourself.
Yes, if you are self-employed, you do not use payee. Instead, you are legally required to complete and submit a self-assessment tax return every year, calculating and paying your own tax bill to the government.
And there is a second major deduction from your paycheck as well.
National insurance. This is a separate mandatory contribution. The funds collected through national insurance are specifically earmarked to pay for state benefits, primarily the National Health Service, the NHS, and the state pension system for retirees.
Now, I just want to pause and offer a strategic note to the listener regarding this section. The overall syllabus for the test references broad civic responsibilities, which might include things like understanding driving laws. However, if you look closely at the provided core materials, which is what the test heavily samples from, the overwhelming focus is on the specific mechanics of these tax systems, the differences between the court structures, and the fundamental community responsibilities. So prioritize your mental energy there.
That is sound advice. And speaking of fundamental community responsibilities, the materials conclude by reinforcing the absolute supremacy of British law regarding human rights. While the UK respects diverse cultural traditions, the law fiercely enforces equal opportunities and bodily autonomy.
There are no cultural exemptions to the law.
None whatsoever. The text explicitly mandates that practices such as female genital mutilation, FGM, and forced marriage are severe, strictly prosecuted crimes. To protect vulnerable individuals, the courts can issue forced marriage protection orders, which legally prevent someone from being forced into a marriage against their will or from being taken abroad for that purpose. The rule of law protects the individual above all else.
Which brings us full circle right back to that social contract we started with, the balance of absolute individual liberty protected by a rigid adherence to the rule of law.
It is the defining characteristic of the entire system we have spent the last hour unpacking.
Awesome. Now, before we wrap up, we are going to do a rapid-fire revision section.
Sounds good.
It's time for the final sprint, a high-speed review of the absolute must-know dates and facts from the 4925 summary. I will shout out the date or concept. You give me the one-sentence answer.
Ready? Ready?
1066.
Battle of Hastings, Norman Conquest.
1215.
Magna Carta limits the king's power.
1485.
Battle of Bosworth, end of Wars of the Roses.
15.
Defeat of the Spanish Armada.
1689.
Bill of Rights.
1833.
Emancipation Act abolishes slavery.
1918 and 1928.
Women over 30 get the vote, then all adults over 21.
And finally, 1948.
Creation of the National Health Service.
Let's just quickly look back at the immense journey we've taken. We started by mapping out Great Britain and the UK. We walked across a land bridge with Stone Age farmers. We watched the Romans build Hadrian's Wall and the Normans completely rewrite the language and the tax code in 1066.
We examined how a crisis like the Black Death inadvertently birthed the middle class, and how the Magna Carta in 1215 planted the seed that eventually, through a civil war and the Bill of Rights in 1689, chained the monarchy to Parliament.
We tracked the explosive growth of the Industrial Revolution, the moral reckoning with the slave trade, and the massive expansion of the global empire under Queen Victoria. And then we saw the 20th century violently reshape the world with 2 world wars, eventually leading to Clement Attlee's welfare state and the creation of the NHS in 1948.
And we concluded by mapping exactly how that deep history resulted in the modern, devolved, multicultural society governed by an unwritten constitution and a complex, localized legal system today. You have absorbed a tremendous amount of dense, factual material required for your exam.
It is an incredible amount of information, but by understanding the mechanics, the why, and the how behind the dates, it stops being a list of flashcards and becomes a single cohesive story.
Precisely. Before we leave you, though, I want to offer a final thought to ponder as you reflect on this material. We spent significant time discussing the UK's unwritten constitution. We noted how it relies completely on centuries of tradition, gentlemen's agreements, unwritten conventions, and deep institutional trust. As the UK continues to evolve in the rapid, unpredictable environment of the 21st century with increasing demands for local devolution and the sheer speed of digital transformation, you have to wonder, will tradition, precedent, and unwritten rules remain strong enough to bind the political system together? Or will the friction of the modern era eventually force the UK to finally sit down and write a formalized, single-document constitution?
It's a fascinating, open-ended question about the future of a country steeped in its past. Think on that as you prepare to walk into your test center. Thank you so much for letting us guide you through this material. We wish you the absolute best of luck on your life in the UK test. You've got this.